Let me ask you this. How many of you have grown up eating the best food that's available?
Maybe.
All right. I see a couple. Most everybody else probably has grown up eating food that wasn't always the best. Isn't that true?
Yeah.
And as a result, we end up paying the penalty, don't we? Or eventually we end up paying the penalty. But I want to say this, growing up between the ages of probably 5 and 12, I went to public school. And in the winter, what happens in public schools? Everybody gets sick, right? Did I get sick?
Yes.
Yes. I ended up with whooping cough, measles, chicken pox, all of those. When they'd go through the school, everybody got it. And so I happened to see one of my report cards a year or so ago, and saw all of the days I was missing from school one year. And it was a lot of days because I was sick. Now, the question is, why was I getting sick? Should I be getting sick if I'm living right? I'm saying reality. Should I? Probably not. Because perfect circulation gives you what?
Perfect health.
Perfect health. So if you're not eating the right foods, can you have perfect circulation?
No.
If you're not exercising, can you have perfect circulation?
No.
No. So if you're in an overheated room, or you're sleeping in an overheated room, or one that's too cold, are you going to have perfect circulation? No. And so I got sick. But between about the ages of 12 and whatever, I didn't miss school any longer. What do you think had changed?
Immune system got stronger.
A little ate maybe a little differently, not so much sweet stuff, sugary stuff, more exercise outside. Because I was in high school, I had some animals for my agriculture class, an FFA project, and so I had to do a lot of work outside. And then when I graduated, I took a job teaching junior high school. I had 225 students a day. Now, did I get sick? I never missed one day of teaching in 4 years. Now, what do you think was happening with all the students in that school? They're all getting sick, right? I didn't miss one day. And then when I began working in ministry, how many days in 40 years do you suppose I missed church because of sickness?
3. 0. Wow.
0 because of sickness. Now, injury, when I fell with a ladder and broke my back and my arm, of course I missed church 1 week. But
Just 1 week?
yes. I hobbled in and sat in a chair in the middle of the aisle the next week. But I'm not saying this to brag, but I'm just telling you, what happened, do you suppose, that kept me from getting sick? Because people are getting sick all the time, right? You're there with them. But my wife and I started doing things differently. Stopped the sugary stuff. I quit eating meat finally when I was about 25. Finally became a vegan. All of those things I think were involved, but a lot of exercise outside. And even today, I do a lot of work out in the woods and cutting trees and splitting wood and moving all of that. So should we be getting sick? Probably not. But I would say this, if you don't want to get sick, then make sure that you eat right and you do exercise. We have a window in our bedroom that sometimes in the winter is open this much. So we get plenty of fresh air. We get all the time. It doesn't matter when, the windows are open to get fresh air in the house. So then what happens to all the diseased germs and the stale air? Well, it's gone. And all of that has helped. But I'm not here to brag about that, but just to give you an idea that God wants us to be healthy. Because if a person is sick or diseased, what happens up here? Do you feel like reading your Bible when you're sick? Do you feel like praying when you're sick? No. And so then Satan has a field day trying to tempt us when we're not feeling good, to get discouraged, say things that we normally wouldn't say, to get upset with one another. And so our health has a lot to do with the disposition we have. You know, if we're healthy, we're cheerful, we're less likely to say and act out negative things when they happen, because are negative things happening? All the time. So that's happening, you know, that happened in my life, that God gave me, I believe, a good constitution, and yet I've been basically free from much sickness for most of my life. But what's happening in our physical world that could easily change that? I want to read to you. It says this: the world's foremost experts on animal populations are warning that the annihilation of wildlife is now an emergency that also threatens human civilization. Since 1970, humanity has wiped out 60% of mammals, birds, fish, and reptiles.
You say 1970?
Since 1970. Now that's a lot to think. 60% of the population of mammals, birds, fish, and reptiles been wiped out. What do you suppose the cause of that is? Do you think our environment has changed? Yes. So it says we're sleepwalking towards the edge of a cliff. If there was a 60% decline in the human population, that would be the equivalent to emptying North America, South America, Africa, Europe, China, and Oceania. What would happen if 60% of the world's population was gone? Would that be considered a crisis? Yes. What would the world be doing then? Trying to find an answer to stop it, wouldn't they? And so it says the Living Planet Index produced for WWF by the Zoological Society of London used data to track the decline of wildlife from 16,704 populations of mammals, birds, fish, reptiles, and amphibians, representing more than 4,000 species. So between 1970 and 2014, these populations fell by an average of 60%. That's serious business, isn't it? 40 years ago, the decline was 52%. And the shocking truth is that the wildlife crash is continuing unabated. Habitats suffering the greatest damage are rivers and lakes, where wildlife populations have fallen 83%. The biggest cause, of course, is destruction of habitat. But it says the second biggest cause is killing for food. 300 mammal species are being eaten into extinction. While the oceans are massively overfished, with more than half now being industrially fished. What's going to happen to the population of the oceans if that keeps up? They'll be gone. The adoption of a vegetarian diet as first given by God to man, recorded in Genesis 1:21, would dramatically reverse and cause the decline of these animal populations. So in our physical world, we're destroying it. They found that, you know what Generation Z is? It's the people between the ages of 18 and 31, I think it is. Do you know what they're starting to believe in now? Socialism. And, as a result, atheism. So atheism has doubled in that group from what the rest of the world is. So they're becoming more atheistic as a result of what's going on in our world. Also, you realize that there's a refugee crisis in the world, whether we know it or not. You know what the population of Lebanon is? 4.4 million. How many Syrian refugees are in Lebanon now? 2.2 million. Now, if you took a country of 4.4 million and you stuck 2.2 million in that country of refugees, what's going to happen to that country? They're going to lose a lot, aren't they? They're going to lose their lifestyle. They're going to lose their economy. Things are going to fall apart. Jordan has about 9.7 million people. They have 1.9 million Syrian refugees in Jordan. Germany, 1 million refugees. So it's happening in the world around us. There's a crisis. What's causing it? War, famine, collapse of the economies of these countries, as God is left out of the picture. And we know that even now in our own country, at our southern border, people are calling it a crisis as hundreds of thousands are trying to cross over into America. Can our country survive economically if we introduce 40 million new refugees? Probably not. And yet, as human beings on the face of this earth, if people are fleeing because they're being killed and starved and beaten to death, what are you going to do with them?
Wow. Be nice if we could take them.
Do you just turn them away and say, sorry for you, you're not one of us? We realize we're in a crisis in the world. So what's the answer? Do you have an answer? It has to be the second coming of Jesus.
Amen.
Because our world is not going to get better. Because as the Holy Spirit is withdrawn from the world, chaos becomes paramount, evident everywhere. And that's what's taking place right now in our world, is that chaos is coming. And I don't know if any of you remember when communism fell back in like 1989, or wherever it was, in Germany and Poland. What was behind the collapse of Russia and Germany?
Economy.
Pardon?
Economy.
The economy. And what caused the economy to collapse?
Population.
There was something else. if you were to have looked in Time magazine, I think it was around 1990, there was a Time magazine, on the front cover was a picture of who? The Pope, and who else?
Ronald Reagan.
Ronald Reagan. And what did they say in that Time magazine has happened? Communism collapsed because the Pope and Ronald Reagan developed the Star Wars initiative for defense of the country in case of missile attack. And so America was putting in billions of dollars into this Star Wars initiative. What was Russia doing? Trying to keep up. In order to try to keep up, their economy collapsed. So everything collapsed. So communism fell. The people, the Berlin Wall got pushed over in one night. Everything happened as a result of the economy collapsing. And what did Malachi Martin in his book, Keys of This Blood, say the Catholic Church is looking for? An event to take place whereby the last world power, the United States, will collapse, and it will be given into the hands of the Catholic Church once again. Now that's what a Jesuit from the Vatican said in his book. Russia has collapsed. Only two world powers left, the papacy and the U.S. They're waiting for an event that causes America to collapse. So my question is this. I'm not big into conspiracies. But who do you suppose is supporting a lot of this refugee crisis that's taking place in all these countries in the world? Promoting the Vatican, I would think.
They want us to open the south border, right?
Yes.
That explains that. So they'll crash our government.
Because every commentator on the radio is saying that our economy is going to collapse with this. If we keep taking these in, our economy is going to collapse.
Not only that, a lot of the refugees that are coming up are Catholics.
Yes. And so then we have all of that happening. But then I want to share with you something else. How many of you get our church magazine, Liberty? Anybody?
We used to.
What?
We used to.
You used to. If you were to look in the last article, it says, "Courting disaster." Courting it. The Establishment Clause and the Justices of the Supreme Court. Again, what I'm sharing with you is, if you don't want to hear it, tell me and I will do something else. But I want you to just think this through about what's going on in our world. We can see it. Our economy is not that great. They're saying that if they end up with health insurance for every person in the U.S., our economy will collapse. Mm-hmm. And so what is their proposal? All the children between the ages of birth and 10, they're at the bottom of the list to get health insurance because they're not productive yet. So if they die, it's not as big of an issue. All those between 55 and older, they will be not on the high priority list to get health insurance. Why? Because they're past their years of productivity. So don't worry about them. So if you're between the ages of 10 and 55, you may get health insurance. Well, what does that sound like to you? Does that sound like a disaster coming? The point is this. As we look at what's happening in our world, We look at what's happening in our own country. So we look at what's happening there. What do we think is going to happen soon? What?
Crisis and the return of Jesus.
Yes, it has to happen. But before that comes, we know there's going to be a time of trouble. So it's coming. It's coming. And here's the thing. We, as a nation, have the best constitution that's ever been developed in the world ever. Everybody admits it. Ellen White admits it. Why was our Constitution given the way it is? To prevent religious intolerance and to help everyone live a happy life. And so then they established in our Constitution something that said that our federal government cannot establish a national religion or prohibit the free exercise of a person's own religion.
Amen.
That has kept us from persecution and religious intolerance up until now. And that's still in the Constitution, but if you look, the Generation Z people and those that are pushing for communism, they don't like our Constitution. They want to get rid of it. But if you looked at the mixture on our Supreme Court, 5 of the justices are what?
Catholic.
They're Catholic. What are they wanting?
A
You can-
national religion.
In here, they tell you Clarence Thomas is saying, yes, the federal government cannot establish a national religion,
That's right.
but that doesn't prohibit the states
Amen.
from establishing a state's religion. So that each state, if they band together and they decide we're going to have a state religion, they're saying the Supreme Court probably will not say no. Because Clarence Thomas believes it, Kavanaugh, Gorsuch, all these others that are Catholics will go right along with it. Why? Because they don't believe in the non-theistic religions, as they call it. In other words, they don't believe in Hinduism and all these other religions like that. So that they're saying, if a state then can establish a state religion, all these other religions, Buddhism, Hindu, Islam, become second-class citizens in the U.S. No rights to oppose that. What will happen at that point, do you suppose, to Seventh-day Adventists? We'll be looked upon as second-class citizens too, without a doubt.
Maybe that's good for some of our leaders. For all of us.
Yes. So, I am not trying to scare you. If you go away from here scared and that, you've missed the point. If you have faith in Jesus, when the time of trouble comes, what will happen? He'll see you through.
Amen.
You don't have to be afraid of the future. But it's a wake-up call saying we're nearing a time when we have to be on our guard and be serious about what we believe. We got to get out of this lukewarm condition.
Amen.
We have to quit being Laodicean. We have to be willing to share with others what we believe. We have to be willing to take the time to make sure our wills are given to God each day so that His will is being done in our life and we're not being taught and controlled by the television or the media or whatever else.
Amen.
If we're being educated by the television, what do you think we're going to get? Is there going to be something to see us through to the end? Not at all. If we're allowing computers and smartphones to be our educators, what are we going to get? The same thing.
Dumb brain.
We're being dumbed down, as people would say, by being inundated with information that's never going to prepare us for the coming of the Lord. Am I too straight? I'm not trying to scare you, but this is a wake-up call for me to think, what am I going to tell my neighbors when all this begins to happen? What am I going to tell my own family and people that I know? If my life isn't right, I'll give in to survive. And so that's where I believe we are. We're at a point where all of this could happen very easily, very quickly. All that has to take place is for an economic crisis. And then the states are going to say, what? We have to get back to God. How are we going to get back to God? We got to establish a church that we have to follow the teachings of the church so that God can bless us once again. We got to get rid of all this stuff that's not in harmony with the Bible.
Righteousness by works.
Righteousness by works. Exactly. And if you don't follow along with it, you'll be on the list. You won't be able to buy or sell. So there's where we're at, I believe, in reality. And so as we think about where are we as Seventh-day Adventists? Are we ready to give the loud cry of the three angels in the end? The first, second, and third angels' messages. Some people don't want to give those anymore. Are we ready to give the everlasting gospel? Are we ever to give a warning to come out of Babylon? Are we ever to say we have to avoid the mark of the beast? This is serious business. It can't be business as usual. What is it that's happening is that, again, most Seventh-day Adventists, if I were to question you, if you've been a Seventh-day Adventist for any period of time, I could go through all of the fundamental beliefs and you would check it, yes, I believe it. Or you wouldn't be here. But what happens if the heart isn't in it? If it's not a living experience? When trouble comes, what happens to my resolve?
It's cast aside.
Can be cast aside if I'm afraid I'm not going to get an education, I'm not going to get a job, whatever it might be. I'm willing to try to do that because my family comes first. That's what you hear people saying. I got to take care of my family. God doesn't expect me just to let my family go. In order to save them, I've got to work on Sabbath, or I've got to take classes on Sabbath, or whatever else. What are we going to do? Here's some areas also that our lifestyle, to a degree, is not in harmony with the will of God and the spirit of prophecy. Our dress reform, our Sabbath reform, our health reform. It's not to live 10 years longer. It's to have a clear mind so that the voice of the Holy Spirit can be heard and we can act when God is speaking to us.
Amen.
Not to have our senses so dumbed down by the things we're eating and drinking or watching on TV or listening to on the radio that we don't discern the voice of God from every other voice.
Amen.
There was something that I found here. It says, what course shall I take to best preserve my health? My answer is, cease to transgress the laws of your being, cease to gratify a depraved appetite, eat simple food, dress healthfully, which will require modest simplicity, work healthfully, and you will not be sick. Do you believe that? And it says that it's a sin to be sick, for all sickness is the result of transgression. Many are suffering a consequence of the transgression of their parents. So because you're getting sick, don't say, well, I'm sinning necessarily. But all sickness is the result of transgression,
Amen.
somewhere along the line.
Nobody got sick in paradise.
Nobody, that's right, we weren't conceived in paradise. So we all have a weakness that some of the major sicknesses we may be subject to. But if we're going to follow health reform and get exercise and fresh air and sunshine and do all of the things that we know God would want us to do, can God preserve us?
Amen.
And that's the thing. It says, the present generation have trusted their bodies with the doctors and their souls with the ministers. They do not pay the minister. Do they not pay the minister well for studying the Bible for them, that they need not be to the trouble? And is it not his business to tell them what they must believe and to settle all doubtful questions of theology without special investigation on their part? If they are sick, they send for the doctor, whatever he may tell, and swallow anything he may prescribe, for they do they not pay him a liberal fee? Well, I can tell you this, in Africa, when a person gets sick, almost everybody, you got a headache, doesn't matter whether they're really sick or not. What do you think the first thing, the minute they get a headache, they're saying? Give me a pill. Give me a pill. That's their answer for everything. So they're taking antibiotics for everything that comes along. Well, what's going to happen once you've loaded your body down with antibiotics? When the real sicknesses come, you're not going to survive it. Just like GMO crops. We're spraying our crops with Roundup. What's happening to the weeds? We're getting super weeds that the Roundup won't kill anymore. And it's the same thing if we're just feeding ourselves medication every time we're sick. We've got to try to live a healthful life. Think about, and again, this is going to take time. I'm not talking about you walk out here today and go home and throw everything in the trash. If you do that, you're a fanatic. This has to be done realistically. Something better has to replace it, or you'll be in worse shape than you were when you started. Don't be a fool, but study how can I best preserve my body and my mind in the best possible condition. And let's begin putting forth efforts to see that it happens. There was something here. She said, mothers ought to know what to do in any common case of sickness of their children. It's a sin for them not to know. You know if your child has a cough, if they have a cold, if they have these different things. The mothers, you can learn what to do to help them. You can study some of the herbs to figure out what to do if they're sick. I know for me, when I get poison ivy, I take golden seal root and it's gone. I don't have to get these steroids to get rid of poison ivy. So let's study to see what we can do to preserve ourselves if we don't have medication or doctors or anybody available. How are we going to survive then? This is what Florence Nightingale said years ago, 1871. The chief duty of a nurse, she said, is simply this: to keep the air which the patient breathes as pure as the external air, but without chilling them. You don't want to chill them, so at night, if you have your windows open and your bodies are chilled, you're going to get sick. But you need free air circulating in your room constantly, to keep from getting sick. Well. Said sickness is very largely the want of will. Everything is brain. There are thought and feeling, not only, but will, and will includes it, in it far more than mental philosophers think. So if you will to be healthy, it's one thing also. So if you feel sick, rather than giving in to the feeling and allow that feeling to control what you're doing, will to be well and put forth your effort to be well. Does that make sense? So it's not saying that you may not get sick, because we all have a hereditary in the back that allows us to get sick more easily. But if we're putting our will on the side to do everything we can to preserve our health, might we be a lot better off? Also this, God is constantly at work to preserve you. Another thing she said here was the spare bed. She talked about people having a spare bed that the room is never open for months, and then they send people in there to sleep in that bed, and it's never been aired out. She said, especially in humid weather, the bed is damp, and people that sleep in that spare bed are likely to get sick. She said in that case, there was a stove in almost every room at one point to heat the room, to take out the dampness, to dry out the bedding, so when people slept there, they didn't get sick. They'd open the windows, let the air circulate freely. And this is what Ellen White said of her own family. My mind goes back to Oak Hill Cemetery in Battle Creek, Michigan. I see there 2 graves. My noble firstborn son fills the long grave. Next comes a short grave where lies my darling babe, my last born. The first died of inflammation of the lungs after a sickness of 8 days, in consequence of thoughtlessly resting his head upon a pile of damp charts and falling asleep. The second died from sleeping in a room that had not been used for 2 weeks. A fire was kept burning for 2 hours in this room, which was thought sufficient to warm it. The bed had accumulated dampness. Myself and child took cold. He was a great sufferer for 4 weeks and died in consequence of that damp bed. We don't think of things like that, do we? In other words, be aware of what you're doing. And the last thing, because I know I'm way past time, this is from Councils on Diet and Foods, Reason for Reform. Why do we want to reform? The health reform I was shown is part of the third angel's message, and is just as closely connected with it as are the arm and hand with the human body. I saw that we as a people must take an advance move in this great work. Ministers and people must act in concert. God's people are not prepared for the loud cry of the third angel. They have a work to do for themselves which they should not leave for God to do for them. He has left this work for them to do. In other words, to restore your health, because you're going to be confronted by sickness. And if you go out to give the three angels messages, are you going to be confronted by it? You're going to need to have a healthy mind and a healthy body. So do everything that you can to put yourself in the best possible light so that you're ready to give the three angels message. Your mind is ready. Your body is ready. You fortified your mind with truth. Your body is ready to go out and work among people that may be sick and not get sick because you've been breathing fresh air, you've been eating right, you've been drinking water. And I would say this also, mothers, you are the queen of the home. Your position, Ellen White says, is higher than the king or the queen on a throne. You are called to be the one that's taking care of your children and training them as workers for God. There's no higher work than that. If people today want a higher paying job or a job where you get promoted and people look up to you because you're out in front, Let them do it. I'm not saying it's wrong for a woman to take a position. There were women doctors in Ellen White's day. But by and large, if you leave the education and the training of your children to someone else, are they going to be as concerned as you are about their mental and physical and spiritual well-being? You are the queen of the home. There's no higher position on earth than you as a mother raising your children for God. Do you believe it? So don't let Satan destroy that which God has given you as a queen. And you husbands, don't you put her down as a queen and make her seem like she's a slave to your every wish and will. Appreciate what she's doing for your family, taking care of them, raising them for God and for eternity. I do have one last thing I would like to share with you. This is taken from, if I can find it. There was a little page in the back of the Last Generation magazine. Lifelines. It says this: research continues to show the serious link between chronic traumatic encephalopathy, degenerative brain diseases, and injuries sustained by players of soccer and American football. So people are injuring themselves playing sports, injuring their brains. Is that what you want? But then it says this: forest bathing. Have you ever heard of such a thing? Forest bathing. Taking a forest bath has been shown to yield impressive health benefits. Forest bathing is the intentional Japanese practice of immersing yourself in nature through walking or thoughtful meditation. An experiment performed on 12 healthy males, 37 to 55 years of age, measured the effects on the immune system after a day of forest bathing. Nearly all the participants had a significant increase in blood levels of natural killer cells and anti-cancer proteins. The effect lasted for 7 days. A similar study showed that forest bathing also decreased depression, fatigue, anxiety, and confusion. The benefits of forest bathing could not be replicated in another group of middle-aged men who took a tourist visit to a city environment. Didn't work. These effects can be gained through any exposure to the nature and an outdoor environment, including eating in nature, gardening, camping, and hiking. Spending time in nature can be suited to any level of fitness and enjoyed anywhere. Just visit a park or garden and allow your senses to soak in the sights, the sounds, and the smells. And this is one thing that I know from my wife's experience in midwifery with Amish and Mennonite women. Many of the mothers spend way too much time in the house over a hot stove and don't have time to go out in nature and enjoy the beauties of nature. Husbands, give them the opportunity. Encourage them to do it, to do a little forest bathing. Here we are at the end. We have a work to do to complete before Jesus comes. Everything is against us except the counsel of God.
Amen.
Let's take all the counsel that God has given us. Let's trust everything that He said, and by faith put it into practice. And let's see what the Holy Spirit can do in a life totally dedicated to God and His will for our lives.
Amen.
Amen.